IVM.
Hey everybody, welcome to another week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you are not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. As we head into week 4 of lockdown, we're doing our best to make sure that we maintain our schedules and try and get you as many of the podcasts that you're used to listening as we possibly can, but beg your indulgence if there are any slippages in schedules and times. With that, let's just get on with your show.
You've tuned into a show called Mr. and Mrs. Binge-Watch and you were expecting a spoiler-free episode. So there are many spoilers on this episode. Kripya dhyan dijiye.
You are listening to Mr. and Mrs. Binge-Watch. This is Mr. Binge-Watch, Aniruddha, and with me is Mrs. Binge-Watch, Janice And Janice, do you want to tell our listeners what the time is right now?
How does it matter? We are over a month in lockdown. It does not matter, guys. It does not matter whether it's 3 a.m. or it's 1 a.m. or it's 6 a.m. But it's definitely one of those a.m.s.
So the reason Janice does not sound as chirpy and sounds as morose as she does right now is because Janice isn't really an evening person. Janice is a morning person. I am the evening person.
I'm sorry, are you saying right now is evening? It's an AM.
No, I meant like it's a day and night thing, right? So I'm of course not a morning person, but I get really alert late at night. It's 1 a.m. right now, by the way, and Janice and I are really kicked about recording this at this time of the hour.
Very kicked.
Because it's like we can do this anytime, anywhere, at any time of the day. It's also been crazy, guys, really, this lockdown. I know we spoke about it last week and probably the week after that, and I'm sorry if this is repetitive, but the lockdown has been anything but easy, right, Janice?
Yeah, it's been long in the sense, not just the number of days that we've been sort of quarantined and locked up in our homes, but long also in the days that are in the sense that our days never fucking end. It just goes on and on and on and on.
That is true. And so we thought that we'll do this tomorrow, and then we said, why not? I mean, it's really just about sitting down together and doing this, so why not do it at 1 a.m.? The IVM studios would have probably never been opened at this time of the hour. But the residences of Janice and Aniruddha are always, up open for business. Before we proceed, I want to give a big shout out to my friend and loyal listener of Mr. and Mrs. Binge-Watch, Arkopol Chowdhury. He's this really
interesting name that is, Arkopol.
So Arkopol and me were essentially buddies at DNA. We were both colleagues. He worked for the business section and he has a really cool job right now as an editor at HarperCollins Publishing.
So what do you want from him? Why are we doing this shout out?
Because
Arkopol, he wants something from you.
No, I'll tell you what. Arko got something really interesting to my notice because he listened to our episode like he always does. Like I said, he's been a guy who's always given me feedback about the stuff we talk about. And he spoke about how he heard Audrey, Janice and my cat on the show last week, and he brought it to my notice that Audrey's made her debut on Mr. and Mrs. Binge-Watch.
Hi, sound editor at IVM. Clearly you couldn't wipe out Audrey.
Which is perfectly fine. That's the entire idea. We are at home, we are under lockdown, and we are still bringing you guys these episodes, and we are very happy to. But every now and then you might hear a meow, and that's just one of our cats.
Before we get into the show that Ani and I are talking about today, I was going to say tonight because it is the middle of the night.
You can say tonight, it's all right. Okay. People could be listening to it at any time of the day.
Yeah, but I wanted to talk about the show that we're binge-watching right now, which Aniruddha has never watched Grey's Anatomy.
So now I'll have to give context. Janice, you have this habit of opening a Pandora's box.
Give context.
Every time we sit down to have a simple conversation about the show we are talking about, you'll mention something that's on a tangent and then I'll be forced to give context. So here's what's happening.
But I can give context.
I'm currently totally...
I can give context.
No, but this is my context. It's my story, so I shall share it.
It's 1 a.m.
I'm totally hooked on to Masterclass right now. It's something I've always wanted to do. It's this cool app for those guys who don't know. It's this cool app where people from all walks of life do masterclasses, which are basically turned into like 10, 15, 20, 30 lesson courses.
These aren't just anyone. These are people who are like leaders in their industry and, almost sort of living legends who we follow or like absolute masters of their domain.
Right. So, of course, I downloaded it because I wanted to listen to a lot of the writers and the screenwriters on the app. And I first heard about masterclass a couple of years ago when Aaron Sorkin basically signed on to do a masterclass. And I haven't started with Sorkin, though I started with Shonda Rhimes. And as some of you may know, Shonda Rhimes is the creator of both Scandal and Grey's Anatomy. Her two
and another show called How to Get Away with Murder.
And now How to Get Away with Murder. But basically, Grey's Anatomy and Scandal are her two most famous shows. And Grey's is something she's spoken extensively about on her masterclass. Also, the cool thing about masterclass is that in addition to what the people are talking about, there are also references made and they put up notes. Like, for example, if Shonda Rhimes is talking about the Grey's Anatomy pilot and breaking it down, there is a PDF document with the final script of Shonda Rhimes' version of the pilot being up there. So you can always cross-reference, check, see how things were done. So there's a first draft, a final draft, and so on and so forth. And Grey's Anatomy is just one of those shows that have just flown under the radar as far as I'm concerned. I've somehow just managed to stay away, maybe because it's a medical drama and I feel a little queasy seeing body parts being brought out of humans and
actually,
them
I
being
want to
stitched
ask
together.
you guys that. I feel like there are two kinds of people who can watch really gross stuff on TV and still sort of go on with their meal like nothing happened, which is me. I'm never grossed out. Like, you could be talking about anything. Potty, showing me blood, showing me organs, and I'll probably still go on with my meal like nothing happened. But Aniruddha literally cannot watch anything gory if we're ever having a meal.
No, it depends. I can totally see gory stuff. It depends on how. Yeah, I mean, like when we were watching Grey's Anatomy, there was this one moment. Like there are a few graphic shots of the show. Also, I think it's something that now I don't feel strongly about now that I'm about 2 seasons in, because I've gotten used to it. I think the first few times also because I thought it's like an old show, network show, maybe it won't be graphic. So it's been interesting because I mean we've got time on our hands and it's also bad news for our podcast because it means that we may not have anything new to speak about if we just continue binge watching Grey's Anatomy, but that's what we've pretty much done since the beginning of the week. I of course am doing it purely for the masterclass purposes.
So you're not enjoying it?
But now, can I finish my sentence? But now I'm obviously gotten into it. So let's see how long it lasts.
I love it, For me, it's sort of, I watched, I think, about 3 or 4 seasons. I know it's in its 17th freaking season now, but I watched about 3 or 4 seasons way back in the, 2006, 2007, when it used to come on Z Cafe or Star World, one of the two. So for me, sitting back now and watching it, it's almost like it's new all over again, except that, of course, I remember some of the core relationships and some of the core drama elements. But
the cool thing about Grey's is also that Shonda on the masterclass keeps talking about how she was heavily inspired by Sorkin. So West Wing came out in 99, Grey's came out in 2005, and that time, I mean, West Wing was probably the most popular show around. When you see Grey's, and because Shonda was such a young writer then finding her feet, you can see so many, like literally for me, watching Grey's Anatomy now all these years later, my perspective of it is that it is really a West Wing set in a hospital. I'm not saying it's as great as West Wing or it's that, that's level of brilliance. But clearly that's what Shonda was going for. I think that's how the idea came about, that so many aspects of the West Wing, whether it's like the fast talking, whether it's those walks around corridors, whether it's cutting between 3 different people in the same shot, an activity happening in one corner and another activity in the other, and you cut between the two without those two activities ever merging, is something that Sorkin did, and I could clearly see a lot of that on Grey's. And then there's also that entire aspect about staff being competitive about each other, but at the same time working together. I think it's got many of those workplace environment themes and many attributes. So for me, really, I'm really enjoying that because I'm watching Grey's through that prism. It's not gotten boring for me.
It's just really good network television, because as much as you might say that, there's not that much difference between network TV and OTT sort of shows now, there always will be. Network shows have this way of sort of focusing always more on the relationships, having 3-4 tracks going on per episode, almost at any point of time. And almost every episode is a standalone story by itself. Yes, those relationships and those dramas continue. But unlike OTTs, which only have one main story, I feel like network shows will always have multiple layers and multiple sort of stories going on.
Yeah, but that's also got to do with the fact that because they had 22 to 26 episodes to explore a story over,
could do that.
They had the room to do multiple tracks. Although, to be fair, on a show like Newsroom, which again was a 10, 13-part series, Sorkin did use the same device of like 3 different things happening, because like when there's an ensemble, you get the ability to do that, but it depends a lot on the nature of the show as well, right? So when you're in a workplace environment, there's never any one thing happening in an office, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's another thing. Like when I'm watching Grey's, I can understand that, a lot like West Wing, there is going to be that one major case of the week, but there are 2 little small cases also which are important. So it's been great. And of course, I can go on and keep talking about West Wing.
Yes, but that is, while if you're feeling nostalgic after hearing this conversation, maybe you also should go check out a show that you maybe watched way back and you now want to sit back and watch, because it does feel really nice, by the way, to revisit these shows that you watched probably when you were much younger, 10, 12 years ago. But of course, the show that we're talking about this week, the show we're recommending
Janice is quickly getting into the show because she's afraid that I'm going to break into another little spiel about West Wing.
Guys, if you know anything about Aniruddha Guha in real life, you'll know that he's a major Aaron Sorkin geek. And he'll want to talk about West Wing, and he'll want to talk about the fast writing and the fast scripting and the dialogues and this and that. And that should be an entire episode completely hosted.
Yeah, but I prefer...
Where I am just nodding and saying, I get it.
But yeah, rather than doing one episode and getting done with it, I prefer just bringing West Wing up every now and then like I do.
Sure.
But like you said, moving on.
Yes, let me complete what I was saying, right? I'm saying that the show we're talking about today, of course, is HBO's The Outsider. It's a show that, it's a recreation, it's a television adaptation of Stephen King's The Outsider, the book by the same name. It falls under the crime thriller fantasy genre because
it falls under too many genres.
Yeah, it falls under too many genres.
I don't think it falls under any genre, Janice. It's just a Stephen King. The genre that it falls under is that it's a Stephen King adaptation.
So let your imagination run wild with that one.
No, but it's interesting. So here's what's interesting about The Outsider, right? So The Outsider begins with a crime, as a lot of crime shows do. And it begins with this cop played by Ben Mendelsohn, essentially being alerted to a crime taking place where there's a kid's body that's been found. And all roads and all evidences lead to one man in the county, played by Jason Bateman. So you're already, your interest is already peaked because you realize this is not a whodunit at all, because whodunits always create an impression of who's done it. But here, it seems like a slam dunk. It seems like there is no way Jason Bateman would not have done it. Not only to Ben Mendelsohn, but to the audience as well. But that gets subverted the very next episode when there is evidence basically put ahead which may exonerate Jason Bateman's character.
Yeah, basically by the second episode, you're given an entire sort of theory where Jason Bateman happens to be in 2 places at the exact same time. So the exact same time that all of the witnesses saw him near the dead body of the kid who's been murdered and raped, at the very same moment, he's also in another part of the country attending a conference, a teacher's conference. So suddenly by the second episode, you're like, what is happening? Has Bateman pulled a fast one? What is the con over here? Is there a doppelganger or a twin theory?
Right.
All of that, of course, goes on for a couple of episodes. And, also the fact, then, of course, enters Holly Gibney.
So this is an episode which is going to probably be filled with spoilers. So if you're somebody who's not watched The Outsiders and wants to go back and see it and come back and listen to it, that might be a great idea. And if spoilers don't bother you, then please hang around. It's not like we're going to tell you what's going to happen after this. But The Outsider is a kind of a show where it's constantly shifting tracks, and we might just touch upon that a little bit. And so what makes it most interesting is that it starts being a regular crime drama. And then you feel like, there might be a twist to the crime element where either the person is pulling a con whereby he's going to be exonerated, or the fact that he's probably not done it at all and is being framed. And both those theories keep you entertained, because as an audience, you're convinced that it's Jason Bateman who's done it. But as it happens in Stephen King novels, so the way I would define The Outsider is that it's a procedural seen through the lens of a Stephen King book, so he brings in the supernatural and suddenly, you start questioning everything. And I think that's what makes the show so interesting. It's like watching a true crime drama, but in reality, there's no supernatural twist to crimes usually, right?
What's interesting about The Outsider is that even when you're talking about elements like, there are supernatural elements on this show, there's fantasy, there's a little bit of a lot of imagination involved. But at the end of the day, when you're watching a procedural of any kind, you always want an answer, right? That answer could be in folklore, it could be in legends, it could be in urban myths. You want a concrete answer about what is happening and why it's happening. The Outsider, while by the end of the show there is the final revelation, sort of what's happened and why, but the reason it took place and the main character behind all of this is still never fully clear in the audience's mind, which is actually interesting for me, because I kept looking at the last 2 episodes and saying that, am I buying this enough, or do I need to suspend my own imagination for some more?
I didn't think that. That wasn't my takeaway. I felt like the writers, creators, they were able to convince the audience about what was happening and why it was happening and what the idea behind it was. That was clear to me. And I think Janice didn't enjoy the show towards the end as much as I did. But having said that, I think it might be a good idea for anybody going into The Outsider to know that this is a show that probably peaks around the 7th or 8th episode mark.
Yeah.
And the reason that happens is, it's really a storytelling. It's not a shortcoming. It's a handicap, and there's nothing that could be done about it. The thing is that the show rests on such a fascinating base. What I'm talking about is the first episode and the second episode. There are so many twists and turns coming at you in the first 2-3 episodes that your appetite is whetted, right? And then you are expecting that kind of movement to sort of persist through the show. But around just before the show is about to end, maybe a couple of episodes before that, they begin to sort of, maybe around the end of the 7th episode, things start to make sense. So the moment things begin to make sense and things fall into place and you understand why those things have been happening, that element of mystery is then taken out of it. So then really it's a matter of how it wraps up and what happens in the end.
Yeah.
So I think what happened with us too while watching it, but that's the thing about even Stephen King novels, right? It's not really about knowing. You could totally read a Stephen King novel or watch a Stephen King movie or a show knowing how it ends, because it's really the art, the craft lies in the telling of it.
Correct. The thing is that, I'll tell you what, eventually what I loved about the show is Holly Gibney, right?
Yeah, played by Cynthia Erivo.
Cynthia Erivo. So I'm saying in the first couple of episodes itself, because there's Jason Bateman, there's Ben Mendelsohn, you're already like, wow, this show has some stellar actors who
I just want to go over the entire cast. This cast is complete nuts. All right, Ben Mendelsohn, one of my absolute favorite actors, saw him on Bloodline.
Yeah.
Sold on the fact that he's playing the main lead here. All right, then you have Jason Bateman as your main culprit, or rather the suspect. So you're also interested there because, such a great actor. Cynthia Erivo, who basically enters the story around the 4th, 5th episode mark, and, then the story just goes into a different direction, is actually who the book or the story is named after, which is The Outsider. Who I saw in this beautiful movie called Widows just a week before we saw the show. So she's great. All the other actors, Bill Camp, we saw him on The Night Of. Jeremy Bobb, we saw him on Fargo. Mayor Winningham, who we saw on The Affair. All these actors, Paddy Considine is again an actor that we've seen on so many other shows doing such a great job. So this is like an all-star cast show. And there are moments towards the latter end of the show where all these characters come together in one place. And just that can keep you going, right? Just the basic story idea and the performances are enough for you to be engaged.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, in the first episode, you're already in awe of the fact that you've got you've got an entire star cast filled with names that you've seen in such great shows and films. But for me, really, the show takes off when Cynthia Erivo enters.
Correct.
Right? Because Holly Gibney is fascinating. Holly Gibney is someone who could be considered a genius, who can tell you crazy facts, who can tell you lengths of buildings, who can tell you which baseball player played on which match and why and what his stats are. And yet she cannot comprehend sometimes the most simplest of things, especially emotions and feelings. I mean, she's a fascinating character, and I think after a point, once she enters the show, I started to also look at this the entire ensemble cast and was like, what are the rest of you doing? This woman has entered the show and she's carrying everything pretty much on her shoulders.
That's how. Holly Gibney is a really popular character from Stephen King novels, and I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, because now we live in a world where The Outsider it was pitched as a mini series. But Cynthia Erivo is so good that if there is another, they could totally spin off a Holly Gibney series around her. I'd watch it, but I still feel that Cynthia Erivo does not work on her own. Cynthia Erivo works because she is playing off the performance of many other great actors. Like if there was a show that was entirely built around Cynthia Erivo, I may not watch it, but say, for example, they put Cynthia Erivo and Ben Mendelsohn, who are so diametrically different in personality, together in a show, like a buddy cop show of the two of them, I'd watch that.
I mean, fair enough. I'd have definitely watch it if Ben Mendelsohn and Cynthia Erivo got together. But I'd also totally watch it if it was just the Holly Gibney character. Like, I can see multiple seasons of Holly Gibney having to come in and solve these uncrackable, just mysterious, supernatural, weird cases that have gone cold or that people just can't seem to wrap their head around.
Okay, let me put it this way. Matthew McConaughey was outstanding in True Detective, but you can't imagine it without Woody Harrelson either. I think that's the analogy I would draw.
Yeah, but that was a proper buddy cop play. This is almost like, Ben Mendelsohn doesn't know what to do.
No, but I think the most interesting strand is exactly that Ben Mendelsohn at the end of the day is a cop. Cops go by facts and he's a damn good cop. All the facts point towards Jason Bateman's character being the murderer, and that's the belief that he's going with, and you never question it. Cynthia Erivo, of course, is more into the whole supernatural, spiritual sort of thing. So I like that entire debate because the protagonist of the show really for me was Ben Mendelsohn, because even in the final 2-3 episodes of the show, they were playing a lot on that conflict he had as a cop, where he was constantly battling with the fact that there was this battle happening between logic and, surrealism.
Yeah.
And he could not make his peace with it. And it was almost like he is the audience,
Yeah.
So he's reflecting your own point of view.
Yeah.
And I really like that. And I think that's really what your takeaway is. I think that it was very smart of Stephen King to set a supernatural story in a procedural format, because procedure is all about facts, evidence, reality, truth, testimony, witness. And supernatural, pretty much all the rules get thrown out of the window. So I find that really fascinating about it.
While we're talking about supernatural, of course, if like me, you are a fattu and you cannot watch slightly eerie, supernatural-ish things happening late at night, do not watch this show alone, because I kept telling Aniruddha that I'm so grateful I have him to sleep next to at night, because if I watched this show and went to sleep, I would be freaking out.
Yeah. Also, I mean, now that you bring it up, this may not be the best show to be recommending during a lockdown.
Yeah.
But here's what happens, right? The show literally, the finale aired around mid-March, and we really waited for all 10 episodes to air out, and then we saw it right at the beginning of the lockdown.
I think it was the first show we binged.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you could probably, if it doesn't really bother you, go ahead, check it out. I mean, all 10 episodes are on Hotstar. All 10 episodes are out on Hotstar. You can go ahead and check it out now. Or maybe you could just, bookmark it and wait for the lockdown to end and then see it. I think we both know clearly who the scene stealer of the show is, right? I think we agree on that.
Yeah, Holly Gibney,
it's
right?
clearly Cynthia Erivo.
Yeah, Cynthia Erivo.
Also, Cynthia Erivo is a very interesting actor. She's got this personality which makes her intriguing, mysterious. Also, you should check Widows out. It's a really cool film on Hotstar. And she's in it, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So if you see Widows and then you watch The Outsider, there's no way in hell you'll be able to tell that it's the same actor. Because she brings so much of her personality, her body language to the role, right?
Yeah. Wow moment for me on the series was Jason Bateman has 2 young daughters on the show, right? And after he's convicted and he's no longer around, it's the mother who's sort of now taking care of the daughters and also dealing with her own grief. And the daughter keeps having this recurring nightmare of this man who comes to visit her at night. And tells her about and he starts off looking like a supernatural creature and then goes on to eventually start looking more and more like Jason Bateman, her father, in later episodes.
Yeah, it was quite creepy.
There's this one scene where she wakes up and she goes and she wakes up her mother and she talks about this man who's come to visit her. And it is so creepily shot. I feel like that was the moment I was like, I can't watch this show alone. I can't watch this show alone. What was your wow moment?
No, I think you're right. So I think for me, there were a couple of wow moments. I think the first episode I thought had quite a few wow moments. I think a lot of scenes that had Jason Bateman and Ben Mendelsohn. There's this beautiful scene, I think in the second episode, where Ben Mendelsohn goes to meet Jason Bateman in the prison. And Jason Bateman, interestingly, used to be a baseball coach for the kids in town. And Ben Mendelsohn lost his son. And of course, Jason Bateman is in prison for having murdered a small kid and also raped the kid. Was there rape involved? There was sexual assault involved, right? And Ben Mendelsohn basically asked him a question about whether he ever laid his hands on his son in the past before the son died. Although, there is no connection between his son's death and the murders. And Jason Bateman's comeback in that scene is just something really interesting because it's a very human comeback. And at that point, you really hate Jason Bateman because you're convinced that he's the murderer. I really like that because I genuinely tend to like those human moments between criminal aspects of the show.
All right, so on the Binge-o-meter, for me, The Outsider is like a great buffet or a great thali where you start off really excited because you're like, wow, there are so many dishes. Wow, I'm so hungry. Wow, my eyes are so big and this is going to be amazing. But whether you enjoy the entire show or series totally depends on whether you enjoy the final dessert. So if you enjoy the final dessert, great. High Binge-o-meter. If you don't, well, too bad. Come back and give us gali on social media.
Janice, I really think that this Binge-o-meter thing might be confusing people more than helping them.
No, great thali hai, bhaiyo, great thali hai. Final se finale mein dessert pasand aayega.
I'm not sure if I would draw an analogy with the thali here, but sure, let's go with that for now.
Yeah, guys, it's now 1:45 a.m.
And we are talking gibberish, which is completely fine. The basic idea is that all 10 episodes are out on Hotstar. If we are talking about it on the show, it probably means that we liked it. So you guys should totally go and check it out. And if you're a Stephen King fan, then this show is a complete...
excuse ही नहीं है.
And if you're not, I can tell you this much, even if you dislike the show, because if it's too dark or too complicated, the performances are fantastic. Just for them alone, the show is worth a watch.
Yeah, guys, and if you didn't understand it, फिर internet किसके लिए? Just go freaking Google it. On that note, it is time for Aniruddha and me to say goodbye.
Good night.
Good night.
Time to literally
good night and goodbye.
It's also time to say good night to each other, Janice. It's 1:45 a.m. now.
Don't
it's
lie,
probably
Aniruddha.
Good
We're going
night.
to watch 3 more episodes of Grey's Anatomy now.
Maybe 2.
Maybe. But guys, if you want to come and give us feedback or you want to hear more interesting podcasts like this, of course, please go to ivmpodcast.com or go follow them on their app, IVM Podcast. And of course, if you want to reach out to Aniruddha and me, I'm at Janisek85 on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and now even TikTok. And Aniruddha is at Aniguha on just Twitter and Instagram. Facebook पे वो कुछ और है, TikTok पे account ही नहीं है.
And like my good friend Arkopol, you want to give us any good feedback, positive feedback, and tell us how great our podcast is, please log into Twitter and Instagram and do that because we love good feedback.
Yeah, we love feedback.
But just positive feedback. If you find us weird or don't like our voices, that's just too bad. Just keep that opinion to yourself. There's a lot of criticism on Twitter as it is.
Yeah, don't add to the negativity, bros. Chalo, time to say good night and goodbye. See you next week.
Stay safe during the lockdown. And we'll see you next week once again with another recommendation. Janice, क्या recommend करेगा? We need to stop watching Grey's Anatomy.
Next week we'll recommend Grey's Anatomy.
And start watching shows that we can talk about on this podcast. We'll figure out a way. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.
Do you have a night routine? Well, everyone has one. And the to-do list usually looks like this. Brush your teeth, set that alarm, get into your pajamas, and switch off those screens. But here's one more to add to that list. Tune into the Positively Unlimited podcast for a dose of positive action and tips on how to build powerful mindsets. Episodes out every Monday on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you tune into podcasts.